Hi, I'm Malessa.
And I'm Candice.
Welcome back to The Build Up, presented by Brown Harris Stevens, where we discuss the secrets of building wealth through real estate.
Today, we're going to be discussing a new financing program that gives real estate investors a unique advantage, as well as speaking with today's guest, who's a powerhouse in real estate and a very inspiring woman, MaryAnne Gilmartin.
So, it was really interesting at our last hour event. The topic came up again about, affordability, especially here in New York City. And that really got us to thinking, right? That's why we wanted to discuss this topic today about the new Fannie Mae program.
Yes, we're very happy that this came out. It was at the end of last year, as you remember. And what it is that it's now allowing buyers to finance up to 95% of a purchase of a 2 to 4 unit building. So it's super interesting new program.
Yeah, this is a really great opportunity for buyers to invest, right? Not just to invest, but also to own property, right? So they could live in it. For a 3 to 4 unit, it's 75%. So this really gives buyers a lot of flexibility.
Certainly, because it's a massive difference in savings for going from 5% to maybe 15 to 25%. And what we've seen amongst our millennial peers, as well as Gen Z, who are now entering the home buying stage, is that because the down payment is so hefty, they get discouraged and they don't even want to save. So they're now spending their money on other things like traveling and experiences versus trying to be a homeowner because that barrier to entry has been so high. But now if they know it's only 5%, suddenly it's way more motivating to start to figure out, how do I put this together, either by saving or maybe small gifts from family and things like that. So they're piecing it together now. And the only condition, though, is that you do have to live in one of the units as your primary home, like you said. But what it is that it's now a live plus income. So you're subsidizing your cost of living through the rentals of the other rentals in the building. And now you're not only a homeowner, you're an investor all in one. So it's really, really interesting.
And you can also use the projected rental income, right, to qualify for a mortgage?
Yes, you can. And that's also another really great benefit of the program, which is you're now not only relying on your own income to qualify, you can use the current rent roll if any of the units in the building are rented. And if they're vacant, you can use the projected income of these units to help you qualify for the loan. So it's really helping buyers be set up for success, whereas before it's just felt so unattainable.
Yeah, it sounds like a really great opportunity and a lot of benefits, but I'm sure there's some caveats, right?
There's always conditions, and that's why we always overstress. It's really important to speak with your lender to find out how do these conditions impact you personally. But at a high level, one of the main conditions of this program is that there are limits to the loan amount, and that varies state by state. So how much purchasing power you can use through this program is capped, as well as they're going to look at certain credit score requirements and certain post-closing liquidity requirements. But that's typical with any mortgage and any financing. But again, those specific requirements as it relates to this program are things that you should definitely talk through with a lender if you think that you might be a good candidate for this opportunity.
All in all, this seems like a really great program. And time again, we've been talking on this podcast about, there's a crisis, there's a home affordability crisis here in the United States, but especially so in New York City. So I'm glad that the government is doing something for, homeowners. And this sounds like a really great opportunity for, investors and homeowners to just really explore, to build their real estate portfolio and realize their real estate goals.
It couldn't agree more. So we're very excited to welcome today's guest, who is the founder and CEO of MAG Partners, which has a $1 billion development pipeline in New York and is making an impact with a major development in Baltimore. MaryAnne, welcome to The Build Up.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here with us. You are a self-made power player in the real estate industry, and Candice and I have been working very closely with developers for our whole career, so we understand how very challenging it is. But before we dive into your impressive career, we do want to talk to you about your first love, New York City, and what that experience was like growing up here.
Sure. Well, I was born in Queens in Rockaway and grew up there for some time until my mother, who was a hippie, decided to move us to Woodstock, New York, so she could relive her glory days. And I came back for university. I went to Fordham and have been in the city ever since. I've studied abroad. I've traveled the world, but I always come back to my first love, which is New York. And I raised my children here. I live in Park Slope, Brooklyn.
Amazing.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned Rockaway. There's a lot of development happening there. Have you been thinking anything about that?
I have some family in Rockaway. What's interesting about Rockaway is it's a very insular kind of community, affectionately known as the Irish Riviera. My real father left when I was very young, and my mother said, we need to leave Rockaway before you marry somebody you might be related to. So I can tell you that my memories of Rockaway are really from very, very early childhood. And I do have family that I love that live there. But since going back for Sandy and actually rescuing my real father, who I had not seen from Sandy, I haven't been back in quite some time.
So you're referred to as the accidental developer. So can you share with us how you got into real estate?
It falls under the category of we all need a life plan, but we probably ought to be prepared for that plan to be upended. And some of the best things that happen to us, I think, but professionally and personally, are the things that are not intentional. So just being open to the possibility of life and all of its challenges and all of its gifts. And so I won a fellowship coming out of college, and I was encouraged to take the fellowship, which was really a 2-part fellowship. And therefore I had 2 opportunities to apply my craft in New York City government. It was then Ed Koch's only recruitment tool to get young people to try public service before going into the private sector. I was on my way to law school. And again, I was counseled to do something completely outside my 9 dots. And I was a good student, and therefore I interviewed with all of my favorite agencies, like the Department of Juvenile Justice, the Police Commissioner of New York, and all of the various agencies inside of the law department. That was what I thought I really wanted to do. But remembering what I was told, which is this is an opportunity to do something you know nothing about. Of course, I didn't know much about the law at that time either, but my passion was really to fight for the rights of juveniles in the justice system. This was post-fiscal crisis. No one had the ability to hire anyone, and so all the commissioners were actively pursuing urban fellows themselves. So you would interview with the head of the agency. Oh. So like sitting with the police commissioner of New York City was crazy at 21. And so I rolled into economic development. It was then called the Public Development Corporation. It was, the city was an absolute dump, by the way. We're talking about the late 80s. So, the various agencies would say, well, we don't have a desk for you inside the office. We need to put you in the hallway, but the temperature will come down. It'll peak at about 98, but then by afternoon it'll be cool again. And we think we have the rodent problem under control. So I was thinking, wow, this is hardcore. And I went to school in the Bronx, and I was not fussy, but it was rough. The city office stock is much better today than it was after the fiscal crisis. I rolled into the Economic Development Agency, and it had carpeting and air conditioning, had a president and a board of directors versus a commissioner. And I thought, this is really grown up. I'll hang out here for the summer. They came at me hard. They told me I could go to City Hall. I'd meet Ed Koch. I would work with the deputy mayor, and I could basically touch all of these large-scale public-private partnerships. Not knowing really what that meant. I thought, this sounds great. It'll be comfortable. And then in September, I'll get serious about the law. And it was at the Public Development Corporation, where I had unbelievable exposure to ideas, to people, and to projects. I realized I had real estate in my veins. And my first project was to remove a squatter from a site in College Point, Queens. And it was the craziest story, because all that really needed to happen was somebody needed to talk to this 86-year-old emotionally disturbed man in a dress with a shotgun living in a trailer with, I think, 6 dogs. And all I did was use my common sense and said, has anybody actually spoken to him? And they said, you can't do that. He's emotionally disturbed. I got on the subway and I went to Queens, and I talked him into relocating his trailer from what then became the police tow pound. And I think I tell that story only to say, what is real estate but problem solving and people skills and trying to connect on a human and real level with people to find a better way forward.
That sounds like a real New York welcome to the real estate industry with that deal. But what gave you the confidence, as a younger person, to just go and talk to this person? 'Cause I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, and I would have been scared and intimidated and been like, you know what, maybe we would buy something else. So what gave you that confidence?
I think that childhood that I alluded to, where the only thing I was certain of was that things were going to keep changing. And it was pretty dysfunctional, but I really did not know which way the wind was blowing in any given moment. And usually at the end of the month, we ran out of our lunch money. I was very close with my sisters, close with my mother, but it was a rough ride. And I think in that way, my expectations were measured. I was hungry to pull myself up out of my situation and advance my generation, and I had a passion for the work. And I think those things together make for a pretty good developer, because you need to be very, very comfortable with the ground shifting beneath you. You need to be able to make decisions, live with those decisions. They may not be the right decisions, but there's a cost of doing business. And this idea that you're working with so many disparate parts and they kind of have to come together at any given moment, and you need to lead that Rubik's Cube of problem solving. It just happened to be something I have a knack for, but I don't know that I ever would have known that had I not tried my internship at the Public Development Corporation.
Wow.
And it's no secret that real estate development is male dominated, right? So I think some of those characteristics you just mentioned really helped you. But what was that like? Well, how was it that you paved your way as a woman in this industry?
I have a lot of stories. Maybe I'll write that book one day, where some of the things that happened along the way were really quite outrageous. I think it really begins with a meritocracy. I worked for Bruce Ratner when I left the Public Development Corporation, and I never got that memo that said, you're a woman, you should be intimidated. If I had a place at the table, I took my seat at the table. I always knew what I was doing, and I knew what I was talking about, and I knew what lane I was in. But I felt like I was on a mission to deliver for the company and for Bruce, and he empowered me. And it didn't matter it was the best man or woman for the job. And I think that really propelled me forward, where I had this myopia where I really knew that I was doing good work. And as you become more empowered and you have more power, people fall into line, right? So as a young urban professional, I definitely sat in meetings where people said things that were, you were the apple in your mother's eye. When I first built this building, I met all these ridiculous personalities in real estate, and they became like caricatures for me. But in the end of the day, I knew what my job was. And then we're in a business where you eat what you kill. And I had some successes and some big wins. And I was lucky to be on a run where so much was built in the city. And I worked for an unbelievable visionary who was himself a developer. And I just consider myself to be so blessed to have been able to touch so many different types of development projects across many asset classes. We know in the development business, you're a residential developer, you're an office developer, you build hotels. Rare is it that you can do all of that in an arena to boot.
That's so amazing that you worked for a man who was so empowering, whether it's a man or woman. Sometimes you see women leaders who are not empowering to other women. So, we respect anyone who is a good leader, visionary, like you said. For Malessa and I, we didn't have that positive experience you had. And that was the catalyst for us to go out on our own, because we were in an environment that was productive for us to go forward. But for you, you had great leadership. You were in a great company. But what was the catalyst for you to start your own company?
That's a great question. I want to applaud both of you. It was great getting to know you through the briefing material, and just say to you that we all have to find a way to do it, and it's not always linear. And I think what you did is took control of your destiny and your future, and it's terrifying, actually, even for someone who was part of a public company for 23 years and went on to lead that company. It's very, very different to work inside of a large company, even if you're responsible for a ton of things and a lot of people, to go out on your own and know when you sleep at night that that entire burden rests on your shoulder is awe-inspiring and terrifying all at once. And so the company that I loved, Forest City, was ultimately moving toward becoming a REIT, because at the time that Forest City was founded, it was really a family business dressed up in a public company dress. It was not a REIT, it was a public company in the markets. And of course, everybody in real estate in the public markets became a REIT. So once Forest City officially became a REIT, I knew that it would be more of an operating company than a development company. And as a CEO, I ran the company and I operated the properties we built, but I knew that my first love was building. And so in a very dignified, somewhat confident way, I went to the company and said it was my time and that I needed to go and I wanted to take a group of people, but I didn't want to do it in the dark of night. And we came to an understanding where they gave me the full support of the board. They asked me to tend to certain things like that little project on the corner of Flatbush and Atlantic Avenues. And I ended up getting a bankable contract with Forest City that was for 2 years that really gave me the working capital to start the company.
Wow.
So I was working on something I knew, and all that stuff that was stuffed inside my head could not easily be transferred to the people that were staying behind, or to the company they may eventually have sold themselves to, like Brookfield. So my contract started with Forest City, it ended with Brookfield, and those 2 years allowed me to really stabilize the company and provided the working capital so that I could take these amazing talents that worked with me and stand up the company.
One thing that also really stood out to us about you was how you handled the pandemic, which, was a very difficult time for everyone, especially here in New York City, especially for real estate. Everyone thought New York City's dead and everyone was fearful. No one wanted to touch it. It was very difficult for Malessa and I, but we sought out opportunities and it ended up bringing in a lot of business because we were consistent. We were able to share meaningful information that just kept us top of mind when people did start to rebuild. But for you, you bought out your partners in your company during this time, which, seems like a bold move. And then you also had to deal with your capital partners on your mixed income project called Ruby, which is in Chelsea, Manhattan. And so what was that like for you? Because, you can just, rattle off those things, but that was a scary time and you were making big moves during that time.
Finding opportunity in chaos, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for even knowing all of that, because there's so much nuance to what was happening. I mean, there was this existential crisis about whether New York would ever be back to the way it was. And I had been part of a number of cycles in New York City post 9/11, for example, when I was building the New York Times building, when people questioned whether we'd ever want to be up high in a skyscraper. And I was across from the Port Authority in one of the most targeted locations with the New York Times, the gray lady as the emblematic example of free speech. So I remember those moments. But when you have your own company and now you're saying, how am I keeping this company afloat and how am I going to take control of my future? I even went across the river to New Jersey and I ran McCallie, a public company that was in need of an absolute change at the top. And I was on the board. They asked me to be the board chair and the interim CEO. And I said I wasn't giving up MAG Partners. And the board ultimately agreed to hire MAG Partners to get me.
Wow.
And I said I was going to do it for 8 months. You know what it really was, ladies? It was my pandemic plan, because I knew that they were going to pay me. And with that money, I could keep the company going. And I said to the team, okay, you guys are going to stay in New York. I'm going to go to Jersey. And at night, I'm going to come back and we're going to figure this out. So I actually ran 2 gigs and I did it for 8 months. I found the new CEO. I stayed as an interim, reminded myself of how over public company work I was and how much I actually loved the fact that I had my own company. So in many ways, as dark as real estate was, and particularly development, what it did was it brought me back to all the reasons why I needed the company to keep going and I needed to fund it and I needed to forge forward, because it was a Jekyll and Hyde situation. I'd be looking at business expenses at McCallie where people were, charging, again, in the old era, charging visits to Augusta. And I'd come home and we'd be arguing over whether we should get Zoom or Microsoft for our platform for video conferencing. And I was like, this is a tale of two types of executives, running a big company with a fat G&A and coming back and like arguing over every expense. And so I did that long enough, and I realized I really would much rather be. We all have a master. I just want to say, like, you're never your own master only, but it did allow me, to your question, to convince my capital partners that while everybody's writing the obituary for New York, could we go back in time and let time inform the past, inform the future, and then to study the fundamentals. And you understand residential real estate. There is a housing crisis in this city year over year. And even through the darkest days of the financial crisis, the vacancy rates rarely pierce 3%. So by all metrics, Ruby was going to get built and be successful. And then I argued that the city was shut down and construction was an essential service. Who could build with such a luxurious, like, elbow room than to build a massive building like that in the middle of a pandemic? And so I just got really lucky. People really underwrite to the people that they invest in. And this gets back to what matters. You're investing in projects. No, you're investing in good people that are going to build good buildings. And I think that was the ultimate validation for me and my team that the capital was willing to support putting Ruby in the ground.
I love that story.
Yeah, and now you are underway with a transformational large-scale mixed-use property in Baltimore. Can you share with us the elements of this project?
I think it falls under this category of, doors closed and others open. So we have 2 additional residential buildings we're closing right now for ground up development. One is on 8th Avenue and 26th Street. The other is 50th and 2nd Avenue. Those 2 buildings will be only 2 of 5 ground up multifamily that would be built because of the expiration of the 421A program. That is a travesty. We managed to get these 2 sites with a footing in the ground by last year.
Thank God.
To allow us to do it. So this is why this robust pipeline exists in New York for us. But on the other hand, while short term, these buildings are going to sing, what is the long-term future of rental housing in New York City? We know the office market, well, I'd love to build some office buildings, is also in crisis. And all of this forced me to say, maybe we really should look outside New York City. And I never like to export talent. If it's more than a train ride away, it feels like a high opportunity cost because the New York metro market is just so robust and full of real estate opportunities.
Right.
But as the political climate started to evolve against development and NIMBYism growing and the progressive far left of the city really stopping, the answer is always no. It's no before it's maybe. And it's probably no for most of what we try to get done that's anything significant right now. And that's really disheartening for the city. But it also means that we have to find other ways to grow as a company. And so I was invited to go to Baltimore. I really went there to give some advice because so few people really are involved in large-scale public-private partnerships, 235 acres, massive, impact-driven, purpose-driven, game-changing project in Baltimore. And somewhere along the way, my team and I fell in love with this opportunity to really transform an area of the city that did not displace anyone, its creation, because it was derelict land, but in fact has the opportunity to lift up the entire city and give the city more to love. So great sponsorship and partnership in Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour, and Goldman Sachs as the financial partner. And so this will be a passion project for us because it's 14 million square feet. Wow. So imagine what it means to build 14 million square feet of very, very flexible entitlement in a dense urban environment in a city where it matters. The entire central business district of Baltimore is 14 million square feet, and we could build 14 million square feet. So the work is mighty. If it's easy, we're probably not interested anyway. Yeah. And so I'm super excited about it. We've had some wins. We rebranded it Baltimore Peninsula, and I'm excited to be putting the project on the map.
Yeah, and Baltimore Peninsula, you touched on it briefly. It's seeking to be America's first purpose-driven impact community. But what does that exactly mean for the community? Like, what benefits can they expect from this project?
I love that question because in our business as developers, often there are community benefits agreements. The developers spend most of their waking hours trying to get around actually delivering on them. This is a bona fide $135 million commitment, of which Kevin Plank has already put $25 million in. And there are 6 communities in South Baltimore that will be direct beneficiaries of what we do. What does that mean? It means that we're creating job training programs. We're investing in their communities across the bridge so that it lifts up more than just the footprint of the project. The project has $135 million of minority and women-owned business contracts. And that's a pretty significant amount of contracts have already been let to minorities and women-owned businesses. And 50% of the people that are working at Baltimore Peninsula are from the city of Baltimore. Great. And so these are the metrics that I think really show that we are of and by Baltimore. And if this project is a wild success financially and doesn't benefit the communities in and around Baltimore Peninsula, then we've failed. The last thing I'll say, and something I'm super proud of, is that Pinky Cole, who's the founder of Slutty Vegan and Bar Vegan, she's an incredible entrepreneur at 35, she's an East Baltimore girl. She's opened up 8 Slutty Vegans and Bar Vegans around the country, but decided to come back to Baltimore. And when she came back, we met. And I said, you need to put a Slutty Vegan and a Bar Vegan here, but it needs to be more than just a real estate transaction. You need to be a partner in this building. She has an unbelievable following on Instagram and beyond. She's just written a a cookbook, and she's times 100 people to watch. And so she will participate in the economic benefits of this building when it reaches a certain threshold, because she will have been a responsible party for making that happen.
I love that.
And so just that's not a typical day in the life of real estate, where somebody who comes in who is a game-changing, pioneering young Black woman from East Baltimore who's actually now a development partner in a project from her hometown. I'm super proud of that.
I got goosebumps.
Yes.
You said that.
I love that. It's just that it gives you purpose, right? So it's not just a real estate transaction like you said, but just giving back and having this impact on a community. It's just really amazing.
She cried we had the groundbreaking, the announcement 2 weeks ago, and she wept at the event.
Wow.
She's 8.5 months pregnant, and she's doing a book tour, and she's opening up stores, and she's interviewing with news outlets. It's incredible what she's doing, and yet this project has a very, very special place in her heart and soul because of what it took for her to lift herself up out of East Baltimore and make something of herself and her family.
I love that. And, you mentioned just in New York, it's just so hard, right? We have a housing crisis, but to have that in Baltimore, it just gives you, some sort of satisfaction, right?
But when you go to Baltimore, like in New York, I feel like it's always just the resistance is just there, particularly because developers have such a bad rap in New York. And I think a lot of it's unfair. I mean, we should take responsibility for the things we did wrong, but being a developer in this city comes with an enormous responsibility.
Of course.
And if you're doing it right and you care about it, then it's wildly impactful for the skyline and the ground plane and the life of a city.
Absolutely.
So I feel like we don't necessarily get maybe a bad rap, and in some ways because for many, many, many moons, people went into communities and built whatever they wanted, and it didn't matter what the community thought. In Baltimore, they don't want to be forsaken. They don't want to be forgotten. They don't want to be left out of the conversation, but they welcome you in to come and make their city better. For me, that's been cathartic. For me and my team, with the New York kind of thrust where everything is so negative and anti-change, anti-progress, anti-developer. In Baltimore, it's actually been really good for our headset to go someplace where they're honored and flattered that you would come to their city and try to make it better.
Wow.
I love that. But you did mention in terms of the office, right, industry, it's tough in New York, especially with a lot of, shortage of housing. We've seen a lot of office being converted into residential. But you have been developing, like you mentioned, 122 Varick Street. What gave you the conviction to move forward with an office building?
I think that the flight to quality is unquestionably the differentiator. If you look at the top buildings in the city, they're all performing, and they're outperforming their pre-pandemic selves. And so if you have a B or a C class building, I think you have trouble. I think if you're building a high-performing building, a masterpiece of the modern millennium that really celebrates the way we now want to work, and these are a lot of the principles that I think we were onto, which is access to light and air, access to nature, the sky, gardens, communal spaces, people coming together. If you have solitary work, you can do that work at home. But when you go to the office, you want to have collisions, you want to have the deliberate collisions of ideas and the spontaneous collisions. That doesn't happen from your living room. And again, I was an early adapter of, we were on work, not at work. That's how I raised my kids. You talk about what kind of pioneering things we women had to do in the 90s and 2000s, and that Bruce Ratner let me do is that I worked from home on Fridays and nobody ever knew. But I was just like, I cannot do what I'm doing if I can't, take my babies to school and be there when they get home, at least on Fridays. And so we adapt and we do what we have to do. Nobody could ever imagine what we could do in our sweatpants. But I still think this idea of coming to the office to be in community with others for exchanges of ideas means that the way these buildings operate and how we design these buildings is going to be different than what it was pre-pandemic. And a 200,000 square foot building that could, sitting across from Disney, can really reshape the way we think about office space. So I think it becomes a model. And it's not a skyscraper, it's a ground scraper. And what it really allows us to do is to rethink coming back to the office in a way where you'll want to be there. instead of feeling like you're getting dragged in. And I just laugh because if somebody told us that we could be remote on Fridays or Mondays and Fridays, and we needed to go in 3 days a week pre-pandemic, we'd all think we had won the lottery. Yeah. And so I just think it's funny how the narrative has shifted. But I believe in flexibility. I believe in adaptability. I think it gives women a tremendous leg up in the workforce to have the ability to be flexible. It really saved me so that I could be, I wasn't going to be a successful professional and a failure as a mother. So I had to find that, that was a seesaw, but I had to find that equilibrium every once in a while, right? And I did it because I was able to do it because Bruce didn't care where I was. He knew that I was on work when I needed to be on work. But that didn't mean that I didn't benefit from coming back to the office and being with the team and running the company by being present.
Yeah, I think that another thing that stands out to us about you, and you touched on it before, is that very rarely do you see a developer who does so many different types of development. From you're doing residential, you're doing this master plan. In Baltimore, you're doing office. How do you manage, wearing all these different hats? Because there's something to be said about the nuances of each type. So how do you manage that and approach that?
I think the gift that I received was that I was able to build every one of those asset types. And the only way to know how to do what I do is by doing it. And I see resumes where from the cradle, they want to be real estate developers. Now, mind you, in the late 80s, being a real estate developer is like one step above a car salesman. Nobody wanted to be a real estate developer. All of my contemporaries kind of flocked to the internet, right? I think I also got lucky because in my cohort, there's a dynasty family kind of thing in New York where you're developers because your family is developers. But like not even a woman, but a man or a woman in my generation that just set off to become a real estate developer, there weren't that many people doing that. Right. And then I just hit my stride because I was able to build all these different types of buildings. So I couldn't just wake up and say, I want to be known as an office builder, unless I built an office building. Right. So I think it's managing it now is easy because it's in my skill set in my brain. It's actually that I got lucky in the 23 years that I was there that I could build so many different things. And then once you build it, you can lay claim to it. And again, not alone because it takes so many people to do it, but to have had a small part in building New York by Geary, the New York Times building, Barclays Center, that's a trifecta that I would say in the life of a developer. If you build one amazing building, you should feel lucky. Yeah. So I just feel extraordinarily blessed.
Yeah.
That's amazing. And what you said is true. A lot of people, especially when we're trying to build our pipeline of talent, right? They come in and they have this idea of real estate being so glamorous and they don't really want to do the work. They're like, I want to be a top producing broker or a developer without having that track record, right? So we do appreciate that you do have this amazing track record and portfolio. But I think what we've been, hearing and talking about is you've built your career by embracing the complicated deals, right? So what would you say is some of the best pieces of advice you've received in your journey?
It's either advice or it's what I've learned along the way. And I'd say that it's about the people. So I was never a really good networker, to be honest, because when I wasn't working, I wanted to be home. But I did invest in relationships and I understood the power of a connection. And so by way of example, I think I made Bruce Ratner visit 5 of the top real estate brokers when I got on board. And he was, yelling at me like, we're going to the Four Seasons to do what? And I met MaryAnne Ty. And I was this young, didn't know anything. And I convinced Bruce that he had to know some of these people if we were going to build office buildings. And she never forgot it. And then invited me to bid on the New York Times building because of that lunch. And then she taught me about investing in people. And when you invest in people, good things happen. And so the power of people and relationships is number one. Number two, don't discount the rookie. I'm deeply committed to the younger generation and making sure that in my office, on my teams, the newer team members have a voice and they have to be heard. And a lot of times the answer to the problems is outside the box and we're doing something the same way for 20 years. We don't see it that way. So I really, really value the rookie. And the last is know your wheelhouse. I think this idea of having a place at the table and knowing your place, it's a hell of a lot easier when you know your stuff. And so we are not looking for an unfair advantage, right? We're looking for a level playing field. And if you get a level playing field, then you need to show up and know your stuff And that advice has just meant that I always really knew what I was doing. And if I didn't, I figured out how to make sure that I had the support and others around me. There was no faking it, because even when I was asked to become CEO of Forest City, I told Bruce that I didn't think I could do it, because he was such a strong personality that if I wasn't really in charge, I was compromising myself. I was compromising women in the industry, and I was compromising the business. And so it took me 2.5 years to be convinced by him and others to take the mantle. And it was only because it had to be authentic. It had to be true that I was really in charge, because I ran the risk of being kind of the fake CEO or the figurehead. And I thought that would just be awful for all of us trying to cut a path and to show our children and their children that this is, in fact, real estate's a great place for women.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave you with one final question. It's not maybe the easiest, but what do you hope is your impact or your legacy on the real estate industry?
I want to do one simple thing. I want to show that you can build beauty, and in building beauty, you can deliver value, not just for investors and for partners, but for the communities in which we build, and that the people that are building these buildings with me look something like the people we build for. And it seems so simple, but if that became a real estate imperative, that if you want to go into someone's community and you want to build, you need to look like that community, you need to understand that community, and you need to treat that community like a partner. And by the way, everybody wins. The investors, the partners, like I understand the financial issues here, right? That's so important, but you can do that and you can deliver all these other things. So as simple as it sounds, that's the mantra of the company, which is, we can show people that beauty is possible. You don't have to build schlock to make money, and that beauty is possible for everyone. And it's not even naive. It's actually it's an imperative. Right. So that's what I hope my little dent in the universe, other than my children, is to think that maybe there was a mild upgrade to the industry, because people think about it that way, as opposed to a more commoditized, money-making, self-serving, dynasty-driven enterprise.
Yeah.
I love that. Very inspirational.
Yes.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much, MaryAnne. You are an inspiration. You are a legacy already, and just it's something that Malessa and I hope that we can, have to learn from you, to listen from you. And, we really appreciate you being here today. So thank you.
Well, I have a weakness for competence. I would say that you're very well prepared. Your desire to do this is awesome. I think that it's ideas like this, and you're doing this as a side hustle for the benefit of the industry, and what it means for others to inspire them is what really has to happen. And so I applaud you for taking the time out of your day. You're not obviously selling real estate right now, and you also know your stuff. So thank you for having me. It's really been a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, MaryAnne. Thank you so much, MaryAnne, for joining us today. It was not only a pleasure speaking with you, but learning more about your impressive track record and how you're making an impact on your community.
Absolutely. And her humility was so, so refreshing. What a powerhouse. Very inspiring.
As always, today's episode is presented by Brown Harris Stevens. And if you want to find out more about Tower, you can reach us on Instagram @Tower or on our website, tower.com.
Till next week.